Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane. It's the morning of Friday, the 22nd of February, 2019. And as you can see, it's a somewhat damp and misty morning down here in the southwest of England. I'm in the lee of Dartmoor, and this evening I shall be a few miles along the A38 at Buckfastleigh Town Hall, where I shall be participating in a 5G awareness event. And the title of my presentation this evening is simply 5G, is it safe? And we'll be looking at the evidence that would suggest that there are sufficient concerns which are not being heeded by the authorities that are ramping out their rollout of 5G. And of course, we'll be touching on LED streetlights. So if you want to come along and have a chat this evening, that's Buckfastleigh Town Hall. And doors open shortly after 7 o'clock. And there'll be other participants in the evening, which is scheduled to wrap up somewhere between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. Well, of course, last night I was in the UK column studio presenting episode 113 of Humanity versus Insanity, where I was addressing the evidence of foreign infiltration in UK politics. And, the title of this morning's broadcast is UK Politics, a Narcissistic Swamp, because that's what it is. I mean, anyone who still believes that Parliament as a collective have the best interests of the electorate at heart really needs to step into this reality and step out of their delusion. That's not to say that there aren't some good MPs, some MPs that uphold their altruistic stance, their reason for getting elected in the first instance. But unfortunately, many politicians eventually simply succumb to the corruption, to the opportunities that are presented to them. Perhaps working on the basis, well, if you can't beat them, join them. Well, you certainly can't beat them when you have corrupt, narcissistic MPs that are basically prepared to do whatever the highest bidder, or some cases not necessarily the highest bidder, the most persuasive bidder actually asks them to do. So last night we looked at the funding of this group of independent MPs. And funnily enough, I showed a clip from a documentary that wasn't shown on the BBC. It was actually parts of a documentary that were shown on Channel 4, I believe, but the whole of the documentary was shown on Al Jazeera. And this is exposing the increasing overt influence, i.e. bribery, being used by the state of Israel. And, this is a Zionist agenda. And in France, I have just discovered that Macron is attempting to amend French legislation so that any criticism of Zionism will be regarded as anti-Semitic hate speech. Well, this is simply outrageous. I mean, that is like saying criticism of the Labour Party is hate speech against a minority group in the UK, because Zionism is an extremist religio-political organization that has its roots in the late 19th century. The originator of the Zionist philosophy is credited as Theodor Herzl. And of course, this philosophy is or has been perpetrated by every Prime Minister of Israel since 1948. And if Jeremy Corbyn had been captured on video having the same conversations that Joan Ryan was caught having with representatives of the Israeli embassy, then the media would be in total meltdown, demanding that Jeremy Corbyn stand trial for treason because of his association and clear bribery with a foreign entity. But of course that hasn't happened. But the video evidence of Joan Ryan accepting the offer of £1 million from a representative of Israel, and in that discussion was what was mentioned was bringing down certain MPs that are critical of the Israeli agenda, particularly their agenda against Palestinians and establishing new homesteads on the West Bank. So please do take a look at last night's episode of Humanity versus Insanity. But what I'm going to do this morning is just take a little further look at who this group of independent, in their dreams, independent MPs really are. And of course, let's recognise that none of these treasonous MPs has the courage to stand down from Parliament and initiate a by-election, because they were elected, 8 from Labour, 3 by Conservatives. They were elected in their constituencies on their respective party manifestos. Yet they have decided that they know better, that they reject that manifesto, they reject the leadership of their respective parties, and walk across the benches to take up their seats as an independent group. Can't think of a bigger misnomer. Anyway, let's have a look at who they are. Chuka Umunna, the MP for Streatham, clearly believed that he is destined for great things. Wasn't going to see that opportunity in the Labour Party, so has decided to take his chances elsewhere. Luciana Berger, who is MP for Liverpool Wavertree. Chuka Umunna, by the way, is MP for Streatham. Mike Gapes, MP for Ilford South. Chris Leslie, MP for Nottingham East. Angela Smith, MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge. Anna Coffrey, MP for Stockport. Gavin Shuker, MP for Luton South. And of course, Joan Ryan, MP for Enfield North. Now, what is really interesting is that for at least 3 of those MPs, sorry, let me say that again, at least two of those MPs, Chris Leslie from Nottingham East and Gavin Shuker from Luton South, they represent constituencies that clearly voted to leave the EU. Nottingham East, it was 51% to leave, and for Luton South, it was 56.5% to leave. Now, the Tories that have defected to the independent group, Anna Soubry from Broxtowe in Nottinghamshire, and in her constituency, there was a 54% vote to leave. But Anna Soubry knows best, apparently, in her own mind. Heidi Allen, MP for South Cambridgeshire, and the MP for where I'm standing right now, Sarah Wollaston, MP for South Hams. Now, the story of Sarah Wollaston is really quite tragic, because I have absolutely no doubt that she entered the political arena with the best of intentions. And back in 2010, replacing the incumbent who at the time was caught up in the morass of the MP's expenses scandal. Now, Sarah Wollaston was a practicing GP and canvassed on the basis that she wanted to get into politics to do what she could to improve the health service. Well, having got elected and having made overtures to the party leadership that she wanted to contribute to the improvement of the health service, she was told categorically that because of her vested interest in the NHS, she wouldn't be getting anywhere near any committees that were working on NHS improvements, which of course actually meant destruction, because that was Jeremy Hunt's mission. Anyway, she also acknowledged shortly after entering Parliament that really this batch of new MPs that had arrived in Parliament in 2010 just seemed to be, in her words, division meat. In other words, simply there to rock up and then follow the whip and walk through the appropriate division on each of the votes. However, some years on, she has in some way got her desire, and she now chairs one of the parliamentary committees that looks at healthcare, but she's now clearly very much in the pocket of the establishment. And Sarah Wollaston hasn't made a single contribution to any attempt to stop the destruction of the NHS. And she actually went a stage further and demonstrated her allegiance to Big Pharma by shutting down a cancer event, an alternative cancer treatment event in Totnes a couple of years ago. So these narcissistic MPs who think they know best have defected from their respective party whips, but do not have the courage to do the honourable thing, which is stand down from their position in Parliament and return to the electorate and put themselves on the ballot paper as an independent MP financed by a foreign entity. Just think about the implications of this. Now, I've stated many times over the last few years that, it is crucial that the UK comes out of the EU, and that when that happens, that's when the real work will begin, because the global corporatists and their global bankster financiers will be doing everything they possibly can to destroy the economy and the culture of this country. And those who still bang on about remaining in the EU, just get a grip and look at the reality, because the reality is that it is crucial that we actually focus on what needs to be done when we actually come out of the EU, which better be on March the 29th, or there will be massive civil unrest throughout the country, which is why the police are now stocking up on rubber bullets. So if anyone thinks that the UK won't take a leaf out of Macron's book of what's going on in France, they need to think again. The establishment are on the back foot. There are elements within the deep state trying to create chaos that they think they can control. But the law of unintended consequences will kick in. And so from my perspective, the greater the chaos, the greater the opportunity. But it is crucial, absolutely crucial, that each and every one of us who has an inkling of what's occurring participates in the unfolding agenda. Because if we don't, then the global corporatists are simply going to ride roughshod. They are going to diminish the standards that this country has, which is, perhaps one of the reasons why it's essential to put some of this EU legislation onto the statute books before Brexit, because there's no question the EU standards are currently more stringent than the US or the World Trade Organization. For example, a food product can be classified as organic in the US with 10% contamination. In Europe, it's 0.16. Now, the reality is that the ultimate goal was to bring all of these global standards together softly, so that nobody noticed. You know, in the US now, the frack waste is of such a order of magnitude that they're running out of places to dump it. So there are actually cases now where frack waste is being used for irrigation on food produce. It's being used for dust suppression, and even being used in swimming pools, I'm advised. So fortunately, because of our population density, we have an advantage over countries like the US and indeed Australia, where the corporations take great advantage of the sparse population density and simply ride roughshod over those who happen to have the misfortune of living in the sacrifice zone. But if we don't participate, then the reality is that the corporatists will see the entire UK outside the City of London as a potential sacrifice zone. So somebody said to me yesterday, but Ian, on the basis that things are going to get a lot worse after Brexit, why didn't you advocate staying in the EU? Well, that's Stockholm syndrome. You know, we were misled as a nation back in 1972, and of course again in 75 with the referendum. But in 1972, very, very few people understood the implications of the European Communities Act. But Ted Heath and his advisors certainly did, and they knew that they were initiating the process of the UK becoming a vassal state of Brussels. Fortunately, those who are prepared to do their research, those who are prepared to understand how finance works, those who are prepared to understand the economy of the West, particularly related to fractional reserve banking, know fine well that the only opportunity that we have to address this abject slavery is to get out of the EU, so that nobody can be under any illusion that we are self-governed, and then those who are elected into government are held to account. Their feet are held to the fire. And this is why every single community around the UK needs to let their elected representatives at every level, whether it's local council, district council, county council, MP, of course there won't be any MEPs anymore after March 29th, I hope, but these elected representatives need to understand that if they think they're in that position to serve their own self-interests, then basically they need to take a hike. And we need people in those positions who are genuinely there to uphold the will of the people and to genuinely look after their best interests. And of course, the other thing that we absolutely need to be doing after March 29th is focusing on those occult groups like Common Purpose, like Freemasonry, anyone who has a loyalty to any hierarchy other than that which is in the public domain needs to share their dual loyalty. And in the US, of course, that very much revolves around dual passport holders. Here in the UK, it goes way beyond that. We need to create a society that has a far greater degree of transparency, and that those who believe or appoint themselves in the belief that they are best suited to provide political direction and political leadership absolutely need to be held to account. So we're sowing seeds. There's a lot of work to be done. But obviously I do believe in the capability and the capacity of the British people to recover this nation and to show the way to the other countries that have been systematically destroyed by the EU neocon stroke socialist, let's call it communitarianism agenda. And once again, I regret to say that I have yet to find anyone who has any real depth of knowledge who still believes in Remain. Those who believe in Remain still just trot out the tired sound bites of those who are desperate to keep their snouts in the EU trough. So, it's time to let that go. The country voted out. We need to get out, and we need to focus on building a future that provides real opportunity for future generations to get out of the abject slavery which more than half the country is encased in today. So anyway, that's it from me today. You have a great weekend. Hopefully, if you're anywhere within easy travelling distance of Buckfastleigh, we might see you at the town hall tonight to discuss 5G. And of course, if you think 5G is a wonderful thing, then you should come along and express your view too. Otherwise, take a look at last night's episode, number 113 of Humanity versus Insanity, and check out for yourself where this funding for the independent group is coming, and you quickly realize that there are external agencies looking to undermine the current political arena and take advantage of the ensuing chaos. Let's make sure that we, the collective we, know enough to be able to thwart that agenda and revert to an agenda that benefits the vast majority, not just the few. Thanks again for joining me this week. I will be back on Monday at 8:30. You take care now.